Well, to discuss all of this, I'm now joined by Paul Musgrave, Associate Professor of Government at Georgetown University in Qatar. Thank you so much for being with us. Both sides presenting real progress having been made in Switzerland, but as we know, there are gaps that remain, and we'll discuss those in a moment. But first, what do you think the Trump administration can point to as a win after these talks in Switzerland?
Well, there's what the Trump administration can point to as a win, and there's what I think an objective or outside observer would see as a win. What the Trump administration is going to do is they're going to look at every clause in this agreement and the agreement itself and say that this is due to the negotiating prowess of President Trump and now Vice President Vance. You can see this in Vice President Vance's statements where he talks about bringing inspectors back in, reopening the Strait of Hormuz. But if you're looking at this and you're not working for the White House, I think that you would quite reasonably point out these are all things that existed before the war began. In many ways, this is a return to the status quo ante, except that Iran now has substantial leverage. I think the single biggest thing that the administration can point to, and this is from Washington's perspective kind of a weak read, is that there's greater buy-in among the countries of the Arabian Gulf into this deal. There's more of a sense that this is something that reflects regional aspirations. But again, back in February, these same countries were saying, please don't go to war for exactly the reasons why we're talking about this now.
The fact that they are, according to the Iranians, waiving the sanctions on Iranian oil and petrochemical sales, how will the Trump administration sell that to the American public?
It's going to be difficult. I think the single biggest thing that the Trump administration will point to is that allowing Iranian oil onto world markets is going to help American consumers. The more energy there is, the more hydrocarbons there are on world markets, the lower the prices for petrol, for gasoline in the United States. And that's something that is a very visible political signal. Ironically, I've actually done research on how Americans view this. That is something that Americans will see as a win. The question is, are they going to see that as being worth the price? And I think that public opinion surveys and certainly the tenor of criticism that the Trump administration has gotten really suggests that they're going to see that as, at best, a mixed blessing.
Right. On the unfreezing of Iran's assets, we heard J.D. Vance talk about the fact that if this was to happen, that it would also benefit American farmers and the Iranian people, he said. But as we've heard from our correspondent, it's going to be difficult for Iran to agree to such conditions. Was that just meant for the American public to say such a thing?
Yeah, there's been a lot of people talking about that remark particularly because it's a little bit puzzling. It's a little bit puzzling how American farmers will benefit that. Having fertilizer come through the Strait of Hormuz, that's going to benefit folks in the part of the world that I grew up where farmers are not using fertilizer as much as they would. But in particular, how the Iranian market or assets help. You can get to some weird bank shots to make that happen, but really I think this is something where I think it's important to remember the vice president and the president are looking toward those elections in November where even Iowa has a competitive Senate election, which is unusual for Democrats to be able to challenge there. And I think that they're going to do whatever they can to make this deal look good, even if it means stretching the truth past its breaking point.
Yeah, what they're having difficulty with right now is making this deal look good to Israel, for the Israelis, right? Because we heard J.D. Vance say that both Israel's security and Lebanon's sovereignty needed to be protected. But those goals are currently in tension. So you wonder what they're going to do and how they'll pressure Netanyahu to respect Lebanon's sovereignty. Because right now, the Israeli prime minister is saying that they're not going to pull back from southern Lebanon.
They're not going to pull back from southern Lebanon. In particular, the Israeli government has said that they are not going to pull back from the 6-kilometer buffer zone in southern Lebanon. On the other hand, you have a lot of defiance coming out of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but then you do see some small steps toward de-escalation, a quieter day here in the past 24 hours in Lebanon than the preceding 7 days. But you have to imagine that the pressure that the administration is putting on Prime Minister Netanyahu is intense. And of all of the parties to this war, I think it is Prime Minister Netanyahu specifically who has lost the most because of his gamble.
And how is that pressure, Paul Musgrave, finally being viewed in Washington by the Jewish lobby in Washington as we approach the midterms? The pressure that Trump has put on Netanyahu, is that something seen favorably or not?
I think that there are a lot of pro-Israel pressure groups. I think that there's a lot of individual donors, even like Miriam Adelson, who are furious at this because the entire purpose was to bring President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu closer together. That said, the American Jewish community has had wildly divergent and conflicting opinions on this, and there are some folks who are just purely angry at the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu for putting Israel and the American Jewish community in the position of having to take a bold stance on this. So, but I think that the supporters of President Trump and his traditional more pro-Israeli, pro-Netanyahu policy, they're furious and they're trying to do what they can to change or even scupper this deal.
Paul Musgrave, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for bringing us a view there from the U.S.